Okay, welcome back to part 2 of my card review for Boomsday Project. Really quick, I said I was going to talk about the quote-unquote druid package, which is these 3 cards, in a separate video because I was having a hard time organizing my thoughts. But I've more or less gotten that figured out, so we're going to do that. We're going to do all 3 of these cards together here all at once. Now, I have seen some talk that this card is that if there's ever a consistent way for this to hit 0 mana, it's going to be completely bonkers, that it's a worse offender than Quarter Creeper. Why on earth would you print this? Oh my god, Blizzard, didn't you learn anything? Etc., 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 etc. And I agree. If this ever hits 0 mana, this is a very strong card. You know, you play this alongside Ultimate Infestation when it costs 0 mana. You play your Ultimate Infestation, play 0 mana 8/8 rushes on the same turn. Pretty unfair. The issue that I have with this card is that it is only as good as the Treant generation that it sits on top of, right? And if you take this outside of the context of Landscaping and Dendrologist, pretend they just did not print these 2 cards. The only real, right now, outside of Whispering Woods plus Soul of the Forest, there isn't a good way to generate a lot of Treants. Not only that, or I should say, generating Treants is very clunky. So, right, and on top of that, the Whispering Woods Soul of the Forest combo is 8 mana. So pretend that this card currently said, after you play 2 8 mana turns and 4 cards that you have to have drawn, so approximately 26 cards through your deck, this becomes a 0 mana 8/8 charge. That's not ridiculous because you can't play it exceptionally early. Because after you play 2 Whispering Woods, 2 Soul of the Forest, you've got 14 dead Treants. And yeah, so this costing 0, say, a few turns before the game ends is not that big of a problem. I should say somewhere around turn 15 is not that big of a problem. So one way you can fix that is by adding more existing Treant generation to this deck. What does that look like right now? What are your options? Well, before we look at the other 2 cards, you have Witchwood Apple. Witchwood Apple is extremely slow. It has strange synergy in that because it adds cards to your hand, it does push a little bit of hand synergy. You could do something like Ferocious Howl. Like Ferocious Howl gets better, which is an okay anti-aggro mechanic. You know, heal for more. It maybe pushes large Twilight Drakes plus Mountain Giants. So Witchwood Apple plus token generation plus this sort of pushes a halfway token, halfway giant sort of deck, possibly. You've also got Force of Nature, which is 5 mana, 3 2/2s. My issue with that card is just that it's too little too late in the token deck. You can play it on 5, but you're still really lacking for turn 2, turn 3, turn 4 threats. And that really puts you behind early on the board. So Force of Nature by itself it has its own flaws if you want to add that into that deck. If you take the Whispering Woods Soul of the Forest times 2, which is 14 Treants, combine that with 2 Force of Natures, you've got 20 Treants in your deck. So you only have to play and draw half of your Treant cards in order for this to work, which is significantly better. I should say in order for this to be 0 mana, which is significantly better, but Force of Nature isn't a very good card. You can play it alongside Arcane Tyrant for a little bit of extra tempo on that card, but still, that's a little too clunky. You've also got Living Mana. The trouble with Living Mana is that if you play it any time, even if you play it on turn 10, very often your opponent just leaves Living Mana alone, leaves your tokens alone, and then on the following turn you have 4 mana. And the sad thing is, having 2 turns that are play 7 2/2s and then have 4 mana follow-up is way too weak. You can't utilize those tokens in any way. If you play a Living Mana and your opponent plays a Void Lord, you're extremely sad. It takes you 5 of your 2/2s just to get through the main body of the Void Lord. You don't clear out the Void Walkers, and that was your entire turn, and you have 4 extra mana to do something with. That's just not good enough. The problem is, well, so all of this to make the point that currently, Treant generation outside of Whispering Woods plus Soul of the Forest is pretty clunky. And if Whispering Woods plus Soul of the Forest is the only Treant generation you play, then this card isn't a threat until late. And I think that's completely fine. You either have to play clunky Treant generation, or you have to wait until late for this card to be free. And that's completely fine. That's why these two cards, in my opinion, are the major offenders. This card is 4 extra Treants in your deck, so outside of Whispering Woods plus Soul of the Forest, it brings you up to 18. But even worse is that it synergizes with every other Treant generation in the game, right? If you play this on 10 alongside of a Living Mana, because you have 2 extra bodies on the board that aren't generated by Living Mana, your follow-up turn is on 6 instead of 4. And that's a big deal because that's, double Savage Roar range or something like that. So this synergizes, this makes Living Mana a lot less clunky because your follow-up turn is on less mana, or is on more mana, I'm sorry. If you play this alongside Force of Nature, suddenly Force of Nature isn't too clunky because you have something to play before it. Like I said, the biggest issue in my mind with Force of Nature is that you don't have any threats on 2, 3, 4, 5, or 2, 3, 4. This is a threat, that pseudo threat. It's something you can do on 3 that isn't nothing, and further drives that. So it makes Force of Nature a little more viable. You could also combine this with Witchwood Apple in that you play it immediately after Witchwood Apple, and then on turn 4, you play 2 of the Treants that you got off of Witchwood Apple. So you go turn 3, 2 Treants, turn 4, 2 Treants, turn 5, Force of Nature, that's 7 Treants, and if any of those die, you're now down to a 3-mana Mulch Muncher without any of your Whispering Woods Force of Nature. And this is why I think this is actually the biggest offending card in the Treant package, is because it makes all of your Treant generation is less clunky because of this card. This interacts with everything in the Treant package. And that's why I think what's going to happen is not too long after, or probably people are already getting ideas about this, pretty quickly after the expansion comes out, people are going to be playing Treant token Mulch Muncher decks, because Token Druid is already a thing. So you just jam extra Treant generation into your token deck. You make Mulch Muncher go with it because you have Treant generation, and that's a deck that exists. And probably 2 weeks after the expansion is out, maybe 2-3 weeks or so, there's going to be pitchforks and torches on Reddit over this card. Everybody's going to be talking about how unfair this is. Why would you print this? It's such a horrific offender, etc., etc., etc. And I actually think the problem with this card isn't this card, because it's only as good as your Treant generation is not awkward. And this card makes all of your Treant generation less awkward. So as far as the Treant package goes, this is the worst offender. This card drives it even further because this is going to discover you extra Soul of the Forests, extra landscapings, extra Force of Natures. It's a 2-mana 2/3. Like, you're not going to play this on 2 because you don't really have a way to have a Treant on 2. If they give us a way to have a Treant on 2, then I'm going to throw up. But even so, this card is especially if you're running 2 of these, this is a whole nother round of threats in a Token Druid. Because right now, my biggest problem with Token Druid is that you really only have 2 rounds of threats in the form of Whispering Woods, Soul of the Forest. Whispering Woods, Soul of the Forest. Some people are playing Violet Teachers to go after more token generation, but that's just a little bit weak in my mind, and you have to combine it with too many other spells. That if you take out the Violet Teacher half of the token generation and replace it with this card plus one of the other Treant generating cards, whether it's Witchwood Apple and you go the hand route with Giants and Drakes, whether you go the Force of Nature plus Arcane Tyrant route, We will be seeing the removal of Violet Teacher and the addition of Treants in that package and Mulch Muncher to go with it. And I think that is potentially extremely overwhelming. And that's why I wanted to evaluate all of this as a package, because it's just, yeah, So, yeah, like I said, I think a lot of people are going to be in pitchforks and torches over this card, when really the offender that makes this card good, which makes Treant Generation not awkward and therefore makes this card good, is this one. And this is really what they're going to need to nerf when the time comes. All right, there are other new cards out, so we're going to go over those pretty quickly. Let's start with the neutrals, as usual. We have 1 mana 1/1, give a friendly mech +1/+1, Faithful Lumi. I don't think this is a good card. It's not something you play on 1 in order to try and magnetize things to, because A, you lose out on the battlecry value, and B, it's 1B, whatever. First, you lose out on the battlecry value. Second, it's not sticky enough. I don't think this is a good card. Maybe it's okay, but it's not viable. It won't see constructed play. Weaponized Pinata. I agree with other assessments about this card that 4 mana 4/3 is not good enough. The stats suck. It's also vulnerable to silence, but I don't think you'd even worry about silencing this, because in general, adding a random legendary minion to your hand is not good. I think you can possibly make a shenanigans deck out of this, but I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, you could make a shenanigans deck out of this for fun, but it's not going to be very good. Giggling Inventor. I will say, actually, if this card had Magnetize, I think it would be really good. If you could play this on Upgradable Framebot to turn your Upgradable Framebot into a 5/8 Death Rattle at a random legendary, that I think is pretty decent. But this does not have Magnetize, so it's just not good enough. Giggling Inventor. Battle Cry. Summon 2 1/2 mechs with Taunt and Divine Shield. So 5 mana 2/1. Summon 2 Annoyatrons. As an anti-aggro card, that's surprisingly good. Just because, I mean, you compare this to like Serenite Chain Gang, which you mostly play because it takes 2 attacks to break through it. This is better than that, because this is 5 mana, takes 4 attacks to get through the taunts. It helps you more against smaller stuff. Like if you play this against an odd paladin, it's going to help you with the 1/1s, but of course you're sad, because if you play this on 5 and then your opponent levels up some 1/1s, your 1/2s just aren't doing anything useful. But as a stall out card, this could be really good. It also generates you Annoyatrons to magnetize things to, potentially as a follow-up if any of them survive. So in terms of creating resilient bodies to magnetize things to, this is really good. In terms of anti-aggro, I think it could potentially be very strong. Maybe not overwhelmingly strong, but definitely somewhere in the Serenite Chain Gang. Especially imagine playing this alongside Serenite Chain Gang as a follow-up against aggro. I think that could potentially be a thing. This could be in a package of cards that you play against token/aggro decks just to stall out in the early and mid game, or rather in the mid game for this card. And that's what I'm thinking. All right, new mage cards. Let's start with what I think are the easiest ones. Unexpected Results. 4 mana, summon 2 random 2-cost minions improved by spell damage. So if you have +1 spell damage on the board, this is 2 random 3-cost minions. If it's 2 spell damage, this is 2 random 4-cost minions. This obviously is specifically designed to synergize with the new elemental, which is Battlecry. Your next spell this turn has spell damage +2. So let's pretend you play these alongside each other as 6 mana, generate 2 random 4-drops. Is that good? I don't think so. This card is dangerous. I mean, it's hypothetically dangerous in that spell damage has a tendency to be kind of a snowball-y thing. if you can stick a point of spell damage, it helps you keep sticking spell damage, and this can then snowball off the back of that. But I don't think there's enough consistent. Currently, I think plus spell damage is too. I won't say too expensive. I think it's expensive. I think it costs just the right amount for stat budget, but there aren't good protectable spell damage cards. Like, you could play a Black Cat, 3 mana, 3/3 spell damage +1, but your opponent's just going to clear it off every single time if they have any sort of early game board presence. So I don't think this is a very strange card. If you built a deck around it, I think you lose the game because if you don't draw it, so that sucks. If you put it in a deck that isn't built around it, it just isn't good enough. Celestial Emissary. I appreciate that this is an elemental, so it can go in elemental mage, and I actually think this is a very strong card, mostly in that it can make your blizzards and your flame strikes much larger cards than they would otherwise be. Like, if your opponent plays, I'll say Dragon Caller Alana. I guess you'd have to be mage versus mage for this matchup. But if your opponent plays Dragon Caller Alana, the thing that makes you sad is that all of those dragons have 5 health. You don't really have a good way of dealing 5 damage outside of Thalnos Flame Strike, and Thalnos is a 1-of. So in that case, it would be a tech card. This card is something you can run 2 of just for those niche purposes where you're like, man, if my AoE did 1 or 2 more damage, this would be really good. In that regard, I think this is a pretty good card. You know, just look at Big Spell Mage. Give you the... If Big Spell Mage has a random 2 mana situational ability to increase their AoEs by 2 damage, that's incredibly strong. So I think this is a good card. Might see play in Big Spell Mage, but I'm sure that it will be played alongside some kind of mage deck that has an emphasis on removal. Then we have Astromancer, 7 mana, 5/5, Battlecry, summon a random minion with cost equal to your hand size. Now, interestingly, I think this means you can never get a 10 mana card off of this effect. It's possible if you had Stargazer Luna in play. If you had 10 cards, played Stargazer Luna, ended your turn, then drew this to the right-hand side and played it, there's maybe an order of execution that results in you playing a 10 mana card, but I don't think that's how it's going to work. Also, Stargazer Luna wouldn't stick in that deck. But this effect, I think this is actually really good. I think this is pretty cool. You could compare it to possibly Summoner, Spectral Summoner? No, Twilight Summoner? Whatever the 7 mana 4/4 is, that Spiteful Summoner, that's what it is. The 7 mana 4/4 that reveal a random spell and summon a minion of that mana cost. I think this is in that same category. Obviously, it's a slightly bigger body, but it gives you specific control over what you want to summon as long as you have the ability to manipulate your hand size. I think often the biggest thing you'll want to aim for is 8, just because all of the biggest, most powerful legendaries are on 8, which means you want to play this when you have not exactly 9 cards in hand, and that sort of makes it a control versus control matchup card, because there aren't that many matchups where you're going to be sitting on 9 mana, or I'm sorry, not 9 mana, 9 cards, not under pressure to play other cards, and can play this out as a threat, and also are some sort of minion-based threat deck. So I could hypothetically imagine this being played in Big Mage, just because Big Mage tends to hold a lot of cards, just as an extra threat, sort of the Syndragosa effect, where you just run it to be an extra threat or so. But I suspect that it's sort of an interesting niche card in that I think it could be very powerful, but we'll have to see, because it depends on what deck it slots into, and I don't know that there's any decks that are really good at doing what this card wants to do, or exploiting what this card wants to do just yet. Maybe, I mean, as far as This is an absolutely absurd beginning of endgame, end of midgame threat. But if you're playing a mid game, if you're playing mid mage, you're playing your cards, and this gets less good. So, yeah, I don't know what the deck would be to take advantage of this card, but it could potentially be very strong. New Warlock cards, or any Warlock cards, I should say. Demonic Project, 2 mana. Each player transforms a random minion in their hand into a demon. It is worth pointing out this is a random demon. It's not just that you add the demon tag to a card already in the hand. This is pretty cool in that it does play combo disruption. Like, right now, there's currently the combo Mind Blast, Anduin, Priest thing. And you obviously can't hit Anduin as a target for this. I suppose going back one rotation, you could have hit Kazakis off of... I always say Kazakis. You could have hit Raza off of this and turned Raza into a random demon, and you just win that matchup. And that's the thing. If you're ever in a matchup, if we're ever in a meta where there are extremely powerful combo decks that revolve around a one-of, like a legendary weapon, I guess it would have to be a minion, actually. Druid might be a great example, like... Malygos Druid doesn't play too many minions, I don't think. If you just Demonic Project and hit Malygos, obviously you instant win that game. So I think this has the power. I think this has the ability to be a powerful anti-combo card, which can be very good, but is not in general very good outside of that effect. Especially because this is going to hit one of your own minions. What if you're playing Cube Lock and you turn one of your cubes into a random demon? You're just going to cry. So, very situational, potentially extremely disruptive, potentially not. I suppose it falls kind of in the Dirty Rat category in that regard. Omega Agent, Battle Cry. If you have 10 mana crystals, summon 2 copies of this minion. 5 mana, 4/5. Obviously, if you play this on 10, you're getting 12, 15 worth of stats. Across 3 bodies on top of that. Before now, that might have been good. Going into this expansion, I don't think it's going to be strong enough. Not only that, this isn't positioned in any deck to really be exploitable. I mean, as far as late game threats go, I feel like Blood Reaver Gul'dan plus setup to make Blood Reaver Gul'dan insane is pretty much the way to go right now. If you're looking for extra threats, extra endgame threats off of some sort of anti-aggro deck, you know, if you take... this is an odd card, so you can't put it in even Warlock, but... yeah, I don't see a deck where this is played. It could, I suppose, hypothetically, you could come up with some sort of deck list that's just designed to survive until turn 10 and then start playing huge swings. If you play two of these on turn 10, it's turn 10, 6 4/5s on the board, which is almost Dragon Caller alone up power, but you do have to have both copies in hand, and you don't do anything else with your turn, and you probably just get cleared off immediately. So yeah, I just don't see it. New Warrior Legendary, in the form of a hero card, Dr. Boom Mad Genius. Battle Cry. For the rest of the game, your mechs have Rush. Now this does come with new hero powers that there are 5 that it cycles between. I don't exactly remember what all of them do, but they're generally slightly stronger than... they're stronger than the current existing starting hero powers, but not as bonkers as the... Death Knight hero powers. So it's things like deal 3 damage, there's one that gains a whole bunch of armor, so better there's a better mage version, there's a better warrior version, etc, etc, etc. But the fact that you don't have any control over what the next hero power you get is very clunky. The fact that it rotates between them completely randomly means that you can't really build a deck around the hero power itself. It's merely something you have to use situationally. And as for the effect, Battle Cry. For the rest of the game, your mechs have Rush. Obviously, that's good in a mech deck. Are mech decks going to be good? I don't know. So, especially warrior mech decks. Is that something that would be good? I think that is a deck that has to be strong on its own feet, just because, in general, if the thing that makes mech warrior viable is having rush, then this is inconsistent because this is one of in your deck. So that won't work. If mech warrior is somewhere near viable, you can add this to it just to make it stronger. Okay, Rogue, Lab Recruiter, 2 mana, 3/2, shuffle 3 copies of a friendly minion into your deck. It's the new Gang Up. People have been saying this. It's a little bit different in that Gang Up could target enemy minions, and this only targets friendly minions. But what sorts of things would you want to gang up into your deck? I could imagine putting this in a Faldore Farstrider deck and ganging up your Faldore Farstriders just to keep up your 4 mana 4/4 tempo. But my problem with that deck is that it's too hit or miss. If all your ambushes get shuffled to the bottom, you're sad. If all your extra copies of Faldore get shuffled to the bottom, you're sad. If you draw 2 of these but no Faldores, or draw your Faldores but not your Lab Recruiters, you're sad. So the question is, what sorts of minions would you want to shuffle 3 copies of into your deck? And there's actually one example I can think of that's really unfair, which would be Leroy. Because currently, aggro rogue is sort of a thing, aggro tempo, and you typically hold on to Leroy Jenkins as a finisher, right? What if this card actually said shuffle 3 fireballs into your deck? That's pretty good in a burn deck. So I do suspect we'll see this along any sort of charging cards, mostly for that burn potential. Right now we only have Leroy as sort of the big offender. Would you do it with something like a Reckless Rocketeer? Probably not, because it's too expensive. But yeah, I could imagine playing this as an aggro for the Leroy Fireball effect. Outside of that, are there value cards you could combine this with besides Faldore? None come immediately to mind. So I'm going to say, as far as what I think this does, put this in a package. What do you play this alongside? I don't think there's too many cards that exist right now that you can play this alongside and have it be extremely strong outside of Leroy, but I do think that there's the possibility to print those cards, high value cards. We are in a control meta, so you could possibly see some sort of value rogue. Especially, it would be hilarious to see Valera Sanguinar into Lab Recruit something on the board and then play your shadow whatever card to make a copy of this and redo exactly what you did. So 4 mana, shuffle 6 copies of a friendly minion into your deck. So if there's ever some sort of value rogue, I can imagine this being extremely potent. But I don't know if that deck will come around. Kangor's Endless Army. Resurrect 3 friendly mechs. They keep any magnetic upgrades. You know, I was talking about the whole... What was it? Why can I never remember the name of this card? The 3 mana 2/3 Death Rattle 2/1 mech. The Harvest Golem. And magnetizing a power suit to it. And how toxic I expect that to be. If that was ever a thing, holding this as an endgame finisher seems extremely powerful to me, especially because it's also an odd card, right? Let's say this said 7 mana, summon 2 7/8s with Death Rattle into 2/1s plus a 2/1. That's pretty good. I think we could. I think if aggro mech paladin is a thing, which I have to imagine it will be, that this card is extremely strong as a finisher card. And it's interesting because you don't have to draw it in order to win the game. It's not something you have to build your deck around, and then you lose if you don't draw it. But if you don't build your deck around this and you just stick it into a deck that it would already be good in, it's extremely powerful. So I think this is positioned to be a non-awkward card that wins you the game if you draw it and doesn't lose you the game if you don't. And that's a really good effect. So I think this has the potential to be an extremely powerful card. Autodefense Matrix. Secret. When one of your minions is attacked, give it Divine Shield. This is really good. Is it better than, like, Redemption? Yes, because your things aren't as vulnerable to pings, right? If you're going up against a mage, let's say you have a 3/3 and it dies in a trade, and then you redeem it as a 3/1, your mage the mage just pings it off. This has the effect that you can... It's sort of an interesting hybrid between Redemption and Noble Sacrifice. In fact, I'm just going to say this is a much better Noble Sacrifice, because the best thing about Noble Sacrifice is that whatever your opponent is attacking doesn't get attacked, and therefore doesn't take damage. You know, if your opponent wants to trade a 3/4 into your 3/3, and they attack in, and they hit a 2/1 instead, they didn't get a big value trade, and that's really the important part here. But you only return 2 damage onto that target. If you could return 3 damage, that would obviously be better. Autodefense Matrix lets you do exactly that. It absorbs an attack into a minion and lets you return whatever that minion's attack is instead of 2. Also, it kind of hilarious. I wonder how this synergizes with Noble Sacrifice. Would this give Divine Shield to the thing that was originally attacked, or would it give it to the Get Down? Probably it depends on the order of play. If you play Get Down into Auto Defense Matrix, probably it protects the Noble Sacrifice, which is interesting synergy in token generation. So I don't... If secrets can be put into Paladin, this is very strong. I don't know if there's enough secret synergy, or if the secrets are competitive with the other 1-drops that Paladin is currently playing. Like, is Auto Defense Matrix better than the Righteous Protector? I don't think so. Is it better than... Yeah, I feel like Auto Defense Matrix is more something you want to play to protect a strong minion than a small minion. So this is not going to go into... I don't think you would play this in something like Odd Paladin just to protect your tokens. You'd want to play this in some sort of value, some sort of mid-range, late-game value Paladin. And I don't think that those decks are going to be running secrets. Getting this off of... I forget what the name of it is, but the 2-mana 2/2 Murloc that draws you or discovers you a secret. I believe that was an Ungoro card, so I believe that's still viable. I believe that's still playable. Getting this off of that card is pretty good, though. Dead Ringer. Okay, so I think this is a really cool card, actually. Okay, so this being Death Rattle, draw a Death Rattle minion from your deck. There's essentially 2 ways you can play this. 1, if there's some kind of value Death Rattle deck that you want to play, you know, something like Coffin Crasher, Obsidian Statue, things like that. Things that are just supposed to be Death Rattle minions that go out onto the board, do lots of work, you know, Bone Drake, stuff like that. You know, a strong arena deck. Then this pushes that. It helps you keep cards in hand. It's a not completely inoffensive body at the beginning of the game. Obviously not good enough against a token deck like, you know, Odd Paladin. I keep talking about Odd Paladin just because it's such a unique threat. But yeah, so this letting you hit your powerful Death Rattle cards is really good if you're playing a value Death Rattle deck. Alternatively, talking about Combo Priest, typically combo decks want to run lots of draw. And one of the best draw tools, I feel, is the Loot Hoarder. This will draw you a Loot Hoarder if you have a Loot Hoarder in your deck. So you could almost equate this to, well, I won't make that comparison, but yeah, a 2-mana 2/1 Death Rattle draw you a card that is a 2-mana 2/1 that draws you a card. This is the ability to just keep playing cards that draw you cards. This is a fantastic draw engine and feeds in really amazingly to a combo priest. So I do think if there's a combo priest in the meta, we will definitely see this play, like some sort of extremely draw heavy priest. This will see play in that deck. Will it see play in a value Death Rattle deck? I'm not sure. This does combo with the next card, the Reckless Experimenter. Death Rattle minions you play cost 3 less, but die at the end of this turn. So essentially having this in your hand after you've played this turns this into a 0 mana at the end of your turn, draw a Death Rattle from your deck. Which is decent. I don't feel like that's better, though. Because, I mean, this will help you more aggressively push for your combo or whatever it is you're looking for. But I don't feel like most of the time you're not going to have something to trade this into on the following turn. So if this is next turn, if this is alive, it says trade into something for 2 damage and draw a Death Rattle minion from your deck. Play it alongside this, and it's 0 mana, draw that card right away, but don't get a 2/1. It's an interesting trade-off. I don't know how I feel about this effect. It's interesting. It does push a very draw-heavy combo thing even further, but not that much faster. I mean, your opponent isn't going to be silencing these 3 or less Death Rattle minions, and so you're just going to get them to trigger next turn anyway, right? In what world does your opponent silence a Loot Hoarder just to keep you from drawing? So I don't feel like you need a Death Rattle minion to die at the end of your turn for its powerful effect, unless we see something like the Bloat Bat from Hunter. You know, if you put this alongside things that explode to AoE your opponent's board, then yes, this becomes much more powerful, because then having that Death Rattle trigger right away has extreme value. But I don't think any of those cards exist right now. So this effect to me seems very bland. It doesn't do anything exceptionally strong. It's fine playing your Death Rattle minions without this effect. It's fine playing them with this effect. Not the big ones, though. And you tie it to a 5-mana 4/6. I don't think it's that good. I think this is a little too niche. I think this will most likely not see play. I don't think there's any deck that this sees play in, unless... No, I can't think of it. There could be cards released that make this better, but I don't think there currently exists anything that would make this viable. I don't think this sits in a package that... I don't think there's any package to go along with this, is what I'm trying to say. Cloning Device, 2 mana. Discover a copy of a minion in your opponent's deck. A copy of a minion in your opponent's deck. How good is that? My initial reaction is to compare it to Draconic Operative. In terms of, but you don't get a 3-mana 3. You don't get a 3-mana 5/6 alongside it, and categorically, maybe not categorically, but when you went fishing for things with Draconic Operative, often you wanted the spells, not the minions. Especially because I feel like pretty much everybody plays minions that are designed for synergy these days. So discovering a random minion in your opponent's deck typically isn't that strong. I mean, if you can hit a Syndragosa or an Alana Dragoncaller, sure, but that's not going to happen very often. So this effect is kind of mediocre. Compare it to Thoughtsteal. It's much stronger because you get to pick what you're discovering. In Arena, this is an absolutely amazing card because, you know, it's 2 mana. What you're typically looking for, especially in a top deck war in Arena, this is a great card because you can just find the biggest threat that you're looking for. I feel like the biggest niche this fills is if you're going fishing for a threat because you don't have one. And I don't know if you're ever going to be playing a priest deck that is so non-reactive. Not non-reactive. I want to say that is so responsive and not proactive that this becomes a good enough card to play. Where you're just like, oh, I just need something to play on the board. So I'm going to play a card for my opponent's deck. I don't see it. I think you just put a card in your deck that is a good minion instead of fishing in your opponent's deck for a minion. Zerek's Cloning Gallery. Summon a 1/1 copy of each minion in your deck, up to a maximum of 7, obviously. 9 mana. This card could be... Okay, obviously this is supposed to go in a Death Rattle deck, right? Because 1/1 copies of minions in your deck are only good for the effects that they do on the board. Not only that, you don't get 1/1 copies that declare their death rattles, so it's just... I'm sorry, their battle cries. You do get 1/1 copies with death rattles on them. So these 1/1 copies are only good for their death rattle effects. This means this only goes in a Death Rattle Priest. That means you have to build a deck around this card. Possibly. Is there a generic Death Rattle Priest that you could play anyway that has value? What sorts of things would have to go in that deck? Possibly an Obsidian Statue could respond to big threats like Void Lords and Cubes and whatnot, because you get the free kills when they die. Bone Drakes give you free dragons. I can't immediately think of other things that give you big things when they die. Scalemancer could be hilarious, just because your opponent then can't AoE your 1/1s. But in general, this is 9 mana, low tempo, high value, and that only fits in a meta that is extremely control heavy versus control heavy, where you have the time to play 7 1/1s that are going to generate you value, but not tempo. And we are sort of in that meta, but not really right now. So I don't think this is a very good card, especially because you can't control which 1/1s you're going to summon. If you have more than 7 minions in your deck, you're sort of sad if you miss the ones you're fishing for. Like, let's say, if you're running a Death Rattle deck, you probably run Dead Ringer in order to get those Death Rattle cards into your hand so you can play them. So, in that case, they're in your hand and not in your deck, and this card misses. Or, even worse, if these are in the bottom of your deck, and they get summoned off of Zerek's Cloning Gallery, you've both failed to draw your value because you didn't draw these early, and summoned your draw mechanics instead of your value, which is super clunky. Like, there's anti-synergy here in terms of how this gets... Yeah, Zerek's plus Dead Ringer are, to me, I think, anti-synergy, and you wouldn't run a deck with both. Therefore, you only run a Death Rattle deck with one, and I think Dead Ringer is the consistency you're looking for, so you'd always run Dead Ringer over Zerek's Cloning Gallery. That means in order to build a Death Rattle deck, you'd have to, without Dead Ringer, it would have to be specifically built around Zerek's Cloning Gallery, and that deck is going to be extremely slow, and it's going to lose if Zerek's Cloning Gallery is in the bottom 5 cards of your deck. So, I don't think that's a very good card. That wraps it up for today. Check in for later card reveals, and we'll get talking about them and see how they adjust the packages that they come in. Thanks for stopping in. See you next time.